All right. Good morning, everybody. Today is Daf Nun Tes. Maseches Eruvin. We actually left off for an Amud short, or a Nun Ches Amud Beis. So hopefully after today we'll be caught up in Hashem, and then we'll have to plow forward to try and get ahead before we fall behind for the last time for the weekend, and then we got open field in front of us. So we left off at the top of Nun Ches Amud Beis. We were discussing they measure 2,000 amos to measure the tchum. Now the tchum is measured with ropes that are 50 amos. We say we use those. And the question is, okay, it's all fine and dandy if the terrain is straight. However, what happens if it's valleys? So if possible, or when possible, then you go ahead, you hold the rope higher or lower. So basically it doesn't go down through the valley or up over the hill, because then you'll lose space and therefore it will shorten the 2,000. So we want the 2,000 to be a full 2,000. And therefore there are different methods as to whether you go into a valley, you go down into it, or try and hold it over and go through. So we left off 2 lines from the second line on Nun Ches Amud Beis on top. The Kama Umkoi Shel Gay. So how for a guy? So how deep, right? And how deep is this valley that you go ahead and you count over? So Rav Yosef Alpayim, he says 2,000 amos. So as long as it's not 2,000 amos down, then we go ahead and we include it. Because more than 2,000 down, 2,000 amos down, right, which is quite the drop. Maybe you find by like the Grand Canyon or something like that. Or if it goes 2,000 amos down, then you're talking about basically it's its own tchum. It's like a separate tchum because it's all the way down at the bottom. And if it's 100 deep and 50 wide, in other words, 50 to span it over, then mavlio, then you basically can go ahead and try and hold the rope and go over it, over the valley. However, if not, mavlio, then you don't do it. Then you have to, then you have to go ahead and take it into account, right? And if it's not, so we see over here, it's not. The point is not 2,000 deep. We see it's 100. So our answer is no. Who damer ki acherim detanya acherim ma'imrim afilu amok alpayim v'reichav chamishim mavlio. No, he holds it. Acherim holds it even if it's up to 2,000 and it's 50 wide. Then you go ahead and you span it, and then basically that valley is included. You don't take it all into consideration, any of the amount that it goes down or comes back up. Rather, as long as you can span it 50, then it is fine. And ikadamri, some have a different version. Even if it's more than 2,000 amos, you still go ahead and just span it. Right? Even if you're at the Grand Canyon, it goes across, and the width across is only is less than 50 amos, then you just span it. And come on, who is that like? Lo katana kama. Like katana kama, we set up to 100. Lo kacherim, not like the cherim, we said 2,000. And Zohar says, so he holds like nobody. So my answer is no. Hasam shein chut ha mishkoles yored connecto. We're talking about a place of, let's say you're at where it goes down, okay? So you can go ahead and basically put some sort of stick with a weight to it, and it goes straight down, and the amount it goes down, it can go down. So if you have an area where it goes straight down, then you can go ahead and measure even if it's deeper than the Grand Canyon, right? And then it goes across because it goes straight down. However, where it does not go down, when you basically, you go ahead and you put your rope, and in order for it to go out, it comes in contact, right, with the vertical because it's not straight down. So when your rope comes down, right, it makes contact, then you have to start taking into account. You can't just span it over, and to measure it. So okay, so if it doesn't go down all the way, so how much, right, for it to, in others to be still be considered part of it? So ad kama amravimi arba, as before amos v'chein tani Rabbi Recheska arba. So if it is 4 amos, then it's okay. Straight down, as long as it's within 4 amos, if it goes down, then it's considered to be basically vertical, and therefore you don't have to go ahead and take into consideration, any of the slope at all. And Omar Avimi, so he gilahar mavli l'chayz l'midasa. And once he goes ahead once he gets to the mountain where he goes up, right? Then he's mavli l'chayz l'midasa. Then he goes ahead and he measures it, and he goes back and he sees where he was. And Amarava. So in other words, basically you see where you measure it. In other words, you have to go around the mountain. You see, okay, it was approximately this area. We measure over here, and then we move over, and then we measure it 50 amos the same direction, but we couldn't span the mountain. In other words, we're talking about cases where the mountain is more than 50. So you and Amarava.
What's the procedure of Mavlio?
Well, Mavlio means basically that we can go ahead and it normally means to swallow up. In other words, we swallow up any of the peaks and the valleys, so we don't take those into consideration, right? We take only the straightness and not the peaks and valleys. As we're soon going to see, there's areas where we do take it into consideration, right? For instance, if it's longer or the slope, as we'll see right now. In Amarava,
so wait,
yeah.
Does that mean that we just estimate, or do we actually do that thing?
No, we'll soon see there's areas where we estimate. For instance, walls and stuff that you can't go through, there is going to be estimation.
So Mavlio is estimation then?
No. Mavlio means...
I know, to swallow up.
Right. But over there, in other words, basically...
what's the procedure? How do they do that? They talked before about somebody holding a line at their feet and somebody else at their chest.
Right. No. So that's piercing the mountain. That case, right? That's the case of Mishnah where we go. Right. That's if it doesn't go. Right. It says the ein yachol avliya bezu. Right, then we pierce the mountain. Right, that was the end. In other words, if you can't go ahead and do it, it doesn't span it. In other words, it's too large, it's too long of a mountain. Then you start going and taking into consideration that, as we're soon going to see right now. Let's see this. So only in the case of basically where you go ahead and is basically where you have the mountain that it goes down is, and basically that you don't take into account is when it goes down 10 tefachim within 4 amos. But if it's already 5 amos, then then you go ahead and you do a good measurement basically along the slope. In other words, i.e. you're going to include the slope, and basically you're going to decrease the amount of yardage. And Rav Huna, the Reid Rav Nasa Mas Nikula, he actually learned this limit of Rav Lakula and Amarav Leishana El Bahar Mislaket, right? That in other words, when do you go ahead and basically Mavlio is only referring to one that has basically a gradual slope. In other words, it goes 10 tefachim over the period of at least 5 amos. But let's say it's steeper and it spans then 4. Then he only estimates it and then he continues. In other words, if it's very narrow, right? If it's very steep, right, or the area is very steep, then we don't even have to go out and measure it. Then you can assume, okay, it was around this area, and we'll just continue from, next to it. We'll continue the length without taking into account any of that. That's the case of where they estimated. That's the case of Amdo. And then we said later in the Brisa, actually in our Mishnah, we said as long as it doesn't go outside the tchum. So my time, what's the reason? Because people see them measuring it, they'll think that it only comes to that far. They'll think that it even goes outside. No, let's say that they have to go around the mountain, right? So they stand on the side and they measure it. But that area where they're standing outside is beyond the tchum. Then they don't go ahead and measure from there because that will cause others to see them and then assume that that's within the tchum, and it is not. I mean, if we said he can't do it, this is the case that Eddie referred to before. When they go ahead and they quote unquote, they pierce the mountain. They're mekadrin baharin. So what does that mean? So Tanur Rabbanan, Keitzad mekadrin tachtan keneged libo elyon keneged mergloso. Right. So the bottom one stands, right, holding it basically with his chest, holding it straight to the ground. Right. They have it like level to the ground, and then because the gradual, then it goes through someone else's foot and then someone else stands there, and they stand up, and then their rope goes across, as we saw in the picture yesterday. And says, by the way, we don't use a long rope of 50, because then obviously you're not going to have something that's steep. Rather, you use a short rope, of 4 amos. And number of Nachman, number of Avua, Ein makadrin loy begla rufa v'loy v'arimikla. When you go ahead and measure, right, since you're not taking into account the slope, therefore it's going to be shorter, right? If you take around the slope, then then the area is not just straight across, it's also up, and therefore, because it's be a diagonal, and therefore it's a little shorter. So when it comes to daraisas, such as the egla rufa, seeing as to which town is the closest to if they find a body, or a miklat, or a person has to go ahead and flee to a city in order to get away from the goy adam, then you to measure the closest one, then we don't pierce it. Rather, we take the slope into account because those are daraisas, and daraisas were not makil when it comes to measuring. Fine. Now Mishnah says, "Ein moededin ella mina mumcha." We only go ahead and we measure only from an expert. Riba l'makam echad, umi l'makam echad. Let's say one measures long and one measures short. Shaymin l'makam shariba. Then you listen to the one that's longer. You take the longer one, the farther tchum, the more, because that's the more lenient opinion, right? You have more space to go ahead and travel on Shabbos. Riba l'yechad, remi l'yechad. If one of them is long, the other one's short, so we'll soon see when the Gemara why repeats itself. Then Shaymi l'meruba, that we listen to the longer one. V'afilu eved, and even if an eved tells us v'afilu shifcha or a maid servant nemanin leimar, they are believed to say ad chan tchum Shabbos, right? And they say, hey, okay, I remember back in the day that this is the area where they can go on Shabbos. They are believed and to say such a statement. Because over here the Chamin did not speak to this matter to be machmer, but rather only to be meko. Fine. That was the Mishnah. Zak the short Gemara, top of Nun Tes Amud Aleph, which is today's daf. So he says, "L'makom shriba in, l'makom shemiya lo." What do you mean? You can only go to the long distance. You can't go to the short distance. Say ma'af l'makom shriba. Say no. It means you can even go to the short distance. Obviously, if there's one location is longer than the other one, obviously, since you're allowed to go to the farther location on Shabbos, because that's within Tchum, certainly you'd be able to go within the shorter one. And riba li'achad u'miyad li'achad v'chulei. So then we said, as I mentioned before, the Mishnah, it seems to repeat itself. So Hasul Amali, why did it repeat itself twice? So Hainu Hach, it's the same case. Haki Kama, as it means to say, Riba Echad Umiyad Echad, if you went ahead and one was farther, one was shorter. Shaimin Lezeh Sheriba. We listen to the one that goes farther, and Amr Abai Ubavad Shala Yarba Yaisim Midas Ha'ir Balchsunya. As long as it is not more than the diagonal. In other words, there's a diagonal. In other words, when you have a perfect square of 2,000, as you pointed out before, it's 1.4, right, times times the base, right, or the sides, which would be, right, in the case of 2,000, would be 2,800. But if that amount that was measuring was 585 more, so then, what would it most signify? What happened was they must have measured They must have measured it in diagonals 2,000. But diagonal doesn't get 2,000, as we pointed out. You get longer. You get 2,800, right? So if they measured the distances didn't seem even, right? If it was up to 585, why? What's the number 585 significant to? Because if you have, that was the measure of the diagonal. So if the diagonal was 2,000, then the top and bottom of the square would be 1415, which is 585 amos less than 2.5. That was the reason why you have the mistake of one being 585 more, is because yes, they did measure 2,000, but they measured 2,000 by the diagonal, and really the diagonal you get much more. So therefore, you can go ahead and believe it. But if it's more than that, if the amount that is different is more than 585, that appears to be some other difference between the two, and therefore you should go ahead and basically recheck it, or only follow the less opinion, because the amount that they differ is too much. And Shalo Amru Chachamim is a davar lahachmer lahakil, because the Chachamim only said the matter to not to be machmer but only to be makil. I Tani Lo Amru Chachamim is a davar lahakil el lahachmer. We have other places where it says the Chachamim only meant to, they didn't come to be makil, but rather they came to be machmer. So Ravina Lo lahakil al divrei Torah el lahachmer al di Lo lahakir al divrei Torah el lahachmer al divrei Torah tchumen derabbanan. Yes, when they do come to be machmer, they come to be machmer on deraisas, on divrei Torah. However, tchumen is derabbanan, and therefore there is no reason to go ahead and to be extra machmer as to the length of the tchum, and therefore one can be makil in this case. Fine. Now Mishnah. Mishnah says, we're talking about a Mishnah. We've seen this before. It was brought on, where is this? Daf Mem, basically 2 weeks ago, we saw this. Ir Shel Yachid, as Rashi defines an Ir Shel Yachid as a place that is called a private city. A private city is one that did not have 600,000. According to Rashi, that is a requirement to be a public city. Now remember, a public city is Rosh Hashanah, which cannot be make an Eruv, because you cannot make an Eruv in Rosh Hashanah. You can only make an Eruv on a Rosh Hayachid, or you turn a Carmelist into a Rosh Hayachid by making an Eruv by combining everyone together. So if you have a city that was once upon...
So this is a question of Eruv Chatzir.
Yes, yeah. We're going back to Eruv Chatzeros now. Very good. Thank you. So now, back to Eruv Chatzeros. So we spoke about it. Ir Shel Yachid. So a city was smaller, right? It was smaller. It was 590,000. Then they grew. The Nasis Shel Rabim, and then it became larger. Ma'arvin as Kula. You can go ahead and make an Eruv around the whole city, right? As long as the areas are basically blocked off from being entered into. It's not a thoroughfare that people can travel through the city. And now they can make an Eruv altogether. Why? Because this town still has a shame. It's still known as a private town, even though really now the population is more. The Shel Rabim, however, if it was a public city, it was known as a public city. V'Nasis Shel Yachid, if it was a city like, let's say, New York City, and New York City is going to lose their population because everyone's leaving town, and then all of a sudden they become smaller. V'Nasis Shel Yachid, a Marvin is a kula. You can't make it ever the whole thing. Elim Kain also chutzala, until you take some part out of it. You take some part out of it. People know, because to teach people that you can't make an eruv in a reshus ha-rabim. Unless you basically carve out of it and Ir Chadasha, what is Ir Chadasha? Shabi which is Yehuda Sheyeshba Chamishim Diur and Rabbi Yehuda. According to our opinion, that's Rabbi Yehuda. That's 50 people, so you have to basically carve out a 50-person area. And Rabbi Shimon Aimer, now all you have to carve out is Gimel Chatzer Shel Shnei Batim, 3 chatzeros of each of which have 2 houses. So Zak the Gemara, Hey Chidami. Ir Shel Yachid v'Nasis Shel Rabim. What is an example of a city that was once Yachid and made Shel Rabim? Some Rabbi Yehuda Kigoin Iskarta the Reish Galusa. I guess this town Iskarta of where the Reish Galusa lived. So the Gemara says Amarle. So Amarle of Nachum my time. Well, what's the reason why you listed the city? If you say because people go there because the government is there, and that's where the Exlarch lived, and therefore people came to the author. So Mitkari Adadi. And therefore they'll remind one another. In other words, if you want to go ahead and say, people remind each other, hey, you can't go ahead and carry, right? And they'll remind people that, hey, only in this situation, because it's like a yachid, that's why we can carry, but other situations are rabim, so that people will remind them and not to confuse with other cases. So, Kuli Yisrael Nami. All the other places also, a lot of people, but the Shabbos there's a lot of people that leave their house in the morning and they see each other Shabbos morning. They'll remind each other not to go ahead and carry, right? They can't go. So therefore, there's a lot of people there. So why'd you bring the examples? Rav Nachman Kagon, these karta the Netuzai, right? I guess it was the city of I guess there was the name of the city, right? And this city was one of Natuzi, right? I guess which became it was just an example of a city that became a public town, but nothing unique about it. So any town that was small that became bigger, that's what we are referring to as a town that you can still go ahead and be ma'arif. Now, Taner Rabbanan. Let's see this brisa. Now we're going to go ahead and have a brisa, and then we're going to explain different parts of it. So Taner Rabbanan, Ir Shel Yachid. And the brisa is similar to our Mishnah. Ir Shel Yachid, v'Nasis Shel Rabim. If you had a small town and then it became a public town, Reshus HaRabim Oiveres B'Seicha, and then you have Reshus HaRabim going through it. So you basically have a street going through it, from one end to the other, from the east end all the way through the west end, and it travels through the entire town. So Keitzan Ma'arvinosa, how do you go ahead and make an Eruv? So Aisa Lechi Mikan, Lechi Mikan. Either you put a Lechi, a post on one side, a post on the other side, as a reminder that basically those are the walls, a karamekan or a beam, and that goes across on top on each side. Then you can go ahead and carry on the inside, because since it still has a shame of Ir Shel Yachid, and you closed off the entrances either with only a lechi or a korah, that is sufficient. And then it says, "Ve'ein marvin osal lechatzin." You can't go ahead and basically split it in two and make two different eruvs there. Elo o kula, rather all of it is inside an eruv. O mavui or each mavui on its own. Now remember, right? We talk about Erev Chatzeros, you have to have everybody join together. So if you have 1 yard, let's say shared by 10 houses, and 9 people join the Erev, but the 10th does not, that is problematic. So that since that person didn't join in it, therefore basically they lose out on the Erev, right? They can't go ahead and carry into the Erev because they lost areas. So too, if basically you split a town in half, and it's 2 different Erevs, if they're not completely shut off from one another, right? So the people over here, if they make an Erev without these people, right, but the whole area is really together, therefore these people prevent these people from carrying, and these people prevent these people from carrying. So therefore you can't do it halfway. But you can do it each mavui on its own, and we'll soon explain the difference why you can't split it, but you can do each mavui on its own.
Right, but are they saying you can be ma'ariv the Rishus Rabim here? Is that what they?
So it's a town, right, which is now has a shame of Rishus Yachid, but they have to close off. Now, normally we talk about basically a mavui mafulosh. It's open, so they have to close off the ends. So it's no longer one of the characteristics of a Rishus Rabbim is that it's open, right? It's open on both ends, and people can travel through. So if they put koras or lechis there, it's no longer considered to be an area that's traveled through because it's recognizable areas. But that's only if it was a shel yachid and then it became a shel rabbin. But if it was always
just like there's a street running through it that they're
right, and then they put something up before Shabbos. But if it's always considered to be something which is a rabbin, then they wouldn't be able to do it. Then you're right. Then it's a reshus rabbin. But if it only, let's say there was less than 600,000, right, and then it became more, right. Right, as Rashi points out, right? How does it come out and make a rabbim, right? That more people live there, or they establish, markets there, right? That's more Rishus Rabbim. Then, but if it's Rishus Rabbim Deraisa, then they wouldn't be able to go ahead and make an Erev there. And Haisa Shal Rabbim, if it was once upon a time of Rabbim, more people than people left out. If it was a Rabbim, Shal Rabbim, and it was indeed, it was still 600,000, it was still full. Turn the page. It was only open on one end. Ma'arvin es kula. You can go ahead and make an Erev around the whole thing because it's not considered to be something that can pass through, right? It's not considered mafulosh, and therefore it's not considered to be the travelers of the midbar, because remember, in order to be Rishus Rabbim, it has to be similar to the Dagle midbar. Now we're going to explain this brisa. So man tana de Marav Rishus Rabbim. Who's the one who holds he can be Marav Rishus Rabbim? So Rav Huna, Rabbi Yehuda. He must be Rabbi Yehuda. The tiny in the brisa. Yes, there okay. Furthermore, Amar Rabbi Yehuda. We also seen this. Mishi Yesh L'Shteibatim Mishnei Tzidi Rishus Rabbim. Let's say a person has 2 houses each on the other side of a street, and there's a Rishus Rabbim in the middle, right? Let's say it's Ocean Parkway, right? And he has 2 houses on each side of the street. He can go ahead, right? Make a lechi basically on each side, or make a bima on each side. And he can go ahead and carry across the Rishus Rabbim. So we see, according to this opinion, using merely a lechi or a korah, one is able to go ahead and carry inside a Rishus Rabbim. However, the Chachamim argued Rabbi Yehuda, and they said, you can't go ahead and be ma'ariv Rishus Rabbim in such a way. And Omar Mar ve'ein marvin oisa l'chasim. So we also, next part of the brisa, we said you can't do it halfway. Each half can't go ahead and do their own Erev. And Amar Papa loy amru ela archa. We're only talking about la archa, right? If you do it halfway. In other words, let's say here's a picture. If you do it along, right? So let's say here is your where's that picture? I lost it here. Oh, here's your Rishus Rabbim, right? And the street is in the middle, and if you see that like dotted line is basically the way they like the korah, the beam or whatever, they want to go ahead and separate the town. So they want to basically separate the two sides of the town, but each town has access to that road that goes in and out of the city. Okay? So we're not talking, so we say, Lo amru elo la'archa. That which you say you can't do it halfway is only talking about that way because each side still can use that road, and that road goes through. So therefore, everybody has access, even we'll call it north and south. Even for the south people, their Erev doesn't work. Why? Because even the north people have access to their road, right? And they're not part of the Erev. So therefore, the people of the north ruin the Erev of the south, and same will go over the south people ruin the north. But if it went down the middle, and basically they chopped up the road, now the road is no longer, right, does not go through, right? You see over here, here's the road, and they put the wall basically in between, and the 2 halves are the east and the west side, then that they would be allowed to go ahead and divide the city into. So come on. Why is that? Because since each side is cut off from the other side, the people on the east don't have access to the west gate. The people on the west don't have access to the east gate, and therefore they don't mix. And since they don't mix, they don't prevent each other from using the eruv. So come on, who is this like? So we say, the like Rabbi Kiva. It's not like Rabbi Kiva. Di Rabbi Kiva, Hamar Regal Hamuteres b'Mekayma Aseres Afilu Shalom Mekayma. If you even have one person, right? He has his foot, right, in one area, right? He's allowed to put his foot in one area. He has Rishus there, and he didn't join in the Eruv. He ruins the entire Eruv, right? So we see over here. So Rabbi Kiva holds that even the people, right, who are in the west should have a problem with the east, right? Because they do have limited access there, right? So even according to this, people in each half should not go ahead to match the other one. D Rabbi Kiva, so where it says no. And even if it's not in their place. In other words, even though they don't have the rights, in other words, let's say the case of the east and west, right? So even though they don't have the right to use on either side, or the people on the east don't have the right to use the west, they still root it. So Gemara says no. Afilu temer Rabbi Kiva ad kan lo kemer Rabbi Kiva hasam ela b'shtei chatzeros lifnim zu. That case, which you said that even though people really don't have access, is we're talking about basically one chatzer in another. So if the outer people want to make a rishus, right, their own eruv, and they didn't include the people on the inside, so then the people on the inside ruin the outside, even though they don't own any part of it, but they still need access to it. So since they need access to it, they ruin it, right? So over there, the only time Rabbi Kiva said that other people ruin it is maybe one chatz inside another. The previous last day pieces of Achrina, because the people on the inside have no other entrance. But over here, Hani nafki b'hai pischa, Hani nafki b'hai pischa. But over here, when you have east and west, don't say the people on the east have the west gate. They don't, right? They have their own entrance. They can leave the town on the east side. So therefore, the east and west literally have no need for the other side. And since there's no need on that side, even Rabbi Akiva would agree that each side can go ahead, if they divide it, each side can go ahead and make their own eruv. And he could, excuse me, he could amri. And so also Rav Papa says that what you said you can't divide it. Don't just say that you can't. That what you said you can't go ahead and split in town. It only means when you split it in half, like we saw the north and south, because each side have access. But maybe you think that you can go ahead and make it east and west. Even if you want to go ahead and split it down the width, make it east and west. You can't go ahead and make an eruv there. So come on, who is that like Rabbi Kiva? Is that like Rabbi Kiva? Because he holds that even though you don't own the rights there, but since you still have access to it, you can still use it. It would prevent them from using it. The guy says no. Even maybe calling rabbanan. That would only the time the rabbanan says that they can't go ahead and ruin his two chatzeros one side or the other. The panimius achada l'dashim mishtamsha, because they use the inner one. All right. But over here, who says that they can go ahead and use that one? Who said over there that they can go ahead, in our case, right, which is one street, who says they can go ahead and remove the Rishus HaRabim? So if they can't go ahead and remove the Rishus HaRabim, so therefore really everyone has the same rights to the east and the west. So you can't just say people on the east don't have the right to the west, because they still do have the rights. You can't just cut it off. They're part of the town. So since they're part of the town, you can't just cut off the east to the west, and therefore maybe even their Rabbanan, in this case, will say it's also, they would also ruin it. The people on the east, the people on the east would also ruin for the west, because it's all considered to be, right, one Rishus HaRabim, and therefore, according to everybody, you wouldn't be able to go ahead and chop it off according to the second Ikadamri. You wouldn't be able to chop it off, north and south, like we said for sure, according to everyone. And even in this case, you wouldn't be able to chop it east and west. Fine. Where do we get fine. Where did I get up to? Fine. Omer Mar. Oh, Kula. So he said either all the Arabs all together. Oh, Mavui Pnei, or you can do each movie on its own. So Maishna do the Chatz and the low. Once we always said halfway, you can't do it before. We said the Asya Adati. So why? Because the people on the east will ruin the people on the west. So the north will ruin the south, right? You can't do it all. We said earlier, right? You can't go ahead and divide it, because everyone still has access to other areas. And since they have access, but they weren't included in the Eruv, they ruin the Eruv. So mavli nami asi adadi, right? Each mavli also should answer the other one. So answer no David daka. Over here, right? We're talking about a case where they make each mavli basically makes a small entrance, right? They make a small entrance or doorway for people to go, and therefore it shows that this is their mavli, right? This is the way they this is the entrance where they come and go from the city, and since they come and go through this entrance, therefore they're showing that they're separated from the rest of the town. Like that's what they said in the name of Chisda. But if somebody, let's say, was attached to a mavli, but he made a separate entrance for his house, and therefore he really didn't go ahead and use the mavli, therefore he's not considered to be part of that mavli, and therefore he doesn't aser because he has a separate entrance. So to each mavli, if each mavli has their separate entrance, therefore it shows that they're separated from all the others. Fine, 2 dots. So Haisa Sharabim v'Harei v'Chulei. So Reb Zera Arba Lamasa de Reb Chia. Reb Zera once he made an eruv in the town of the house of Reb Chia. V'Loi Shavik Li'Shir. And he didn't leave over a part. He didn't leave over any part. And it was a Rabbim. It was a public way that became smaller, and therefore we said earlier in the Mishnah that if it's a public that became smaller, you should leave over parts. Machlokes, how much you have to leave over? Is it a new town in Yehuda, which is 50 inhabitants, or was it three chatzeros of 2 houses each? So, but nevertheless, he didn't leave anything over. Similarly, Abai, my time of in Marhachi, why did you do like this? Amarle Sabidi Dat Amarli. So the elders told me, Rav Chia Barasi Ma'ariv Kula. So Rav Chia Barasi used to be Ma'ariv the entire thing. Yamina, and I learned from there, Shmamina must be Ir Shel Yachid, Benasa Shel Rabim. It must have been basically originally a Ir Shel Yachid. It was a private small town, and it became Shel Rabim. And that is the case what we said in the Mishnah. If it started off as small, as the shame of a small town, therefore you can be Ma'ariv the entire thing. However, he said, Amarle, he said, no, that's not true. The Didi Amarle, Hani Sabi. No, the elders told me something else. This was not considered, no, the reason why is it was always a public town. But the issue was, one of the sides of the town, the road that goes across, at one end was the garbage dump. And since it was a garbage dump, it wasn't considered to be a mavli mafulosh. You couldn't travel from one end of the town to the other because it was closed off at one end by the garbage dump. However, however, now that they cleared out the garbage, it's like basically a mavli mafulush, and therefore it goes through, and therefore you can't make an eruv. So therefore, it wasn't right to make an eruv. V'yaser, I didn't know that. Now I know that. Now I will no longer make an eruv there because now it's considered to be a mavli mafulush. And Rav Ami Bar Ada Harfna Marv Sulam Mikan. So he said, what about this case? So he said, Rav Ami Bar Ada Rafna, he says, he asked from Rabbah, Sulam Mikan, Pesach Mikan. If there was a ladder on one side and an opening on the other side, we said it's 2 openings, it's no good. Okay, what if one area was an opening, easily you can travel through. The other area, you had like climb a ladder to go ahead and exit. So Mahu, what's halacha there? Sulam Taras Pesach Alav. Sulam, like a ladder entrance, is considered to be a Pesach. So therefore, it is considered to be 2 openings on both sides. However, Amar Rav Nachman, don't listen to them. Sulam Taras Pesach Alav, Taras Mechitz Alav. Sometimes it's considered to be an opening, and sometimes it's considered to be a mechitza, a wall. So Taras Mechitz Alav Kadamra, and that was the case. So we said earlier, if the street goes, there's a ladder on one end, right? Since there's a way to get out of the city that way using the ladder to climb over a little bit, therefore it's considered mechitza. And when is it considered taras? That's taras. So we said taras mechitza alav kedamran. That was a case of taras mechitza, right? So according to the second opinion, it's considered to be a mechitza, right, and not considered to be. I might have said it wrong before. Shiloh was asked, what is it? And he answered, it's considered to be a Pesach. And then Rav Nachman argued, says, no, it's considered to be a Mechitza. So now, Taras Mechitza, Kida Amran, it's considered Mechitza, like Rav Nachman, who said that if you have an opening on this side and a ladder, right, exit on this side, the ladder exit is not considered to be an opening, and therefore it's not considered to be foolish, it's considered to be closed. And when is it considered to be open? And Taras Pesach Alav, what case? Besulam Sheben Shtei Chatzeros. When you have basically 2 yards, there are 2 different heights, and there's a ladder in between them, right? And if one wants to go ahead and be separate, he can be considered separate. Or if they want to do it together, it's considered the sulam enough to be a Pesach, to be an entrance between the 2, and therefore the 2 of them can join through this Pesach, through this ladder, in order to be one chatzir. All right, we'll stop here. we basically officially caught up. So tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem, we'll see what we can do to try and get a little bit ahead, and then we'll move from there. So shkayach, everybody.
Shkayach. By the way, everyone, Zadie Merrilis is back home. Baruch Hashem.
Oh, very nice. Thank you.
Have a great day.